Hey there, and welcome to my tutorial about how to draw or paint oak trees. These might be the most standard trees you could think of, but they're not boring at all, quite the contrary. You can do so many different things with them, it's really a lot of fun. I'm mainly focused on the white oak, or Quercus alba in Latin, because there were 600 different oak species and I cannot possibly cover all of them, of course. If you want to paint a different kind of oak tree, you can still apply most of the techniques that I show you in this video, and you just have to figure out the differences. At first we're sketching out the trunk, and it comes in all sorts of shapes. It can be wider or more narrow, a bit warpy or just straight up. And then I'm sketching out the general shape of the tree, which is normally wider than tall. Of course there can be some exceptions, but for the most part this would be the most basic form of an oak tree. Of course it can also be a bit narrower, but it won't get too far away from the 1:1 ratio. However, it can be up to 50% wider than tall. So this kind of looks like a turned around strawberry or peach of some sorts, with the edges being very smooth and round. It doesn't have a pointy top of some sorts. Also, the distance between the ground and the bottom of the foliage is normally very short. You can also bring in some asymmetry as long as it makes sense weight balance wise, and also you can divide the basic shape into several smaller ones, like so. Here's the sketch that I prepared beforehand to have something better looking, and yeah, I kept it very minimalistic. However, it is up to you how many details you put into your sketch. So the sketch will be erased, but the next step will remain. I'm already using some paint that will stay at the end, therefore I'm using this kind of very rough textured brush and only very lightly apply the pressure, and dropping in some random shapes in order to sketch out the leaf clusters. Now what are the leaf clusters? Well, the leaves are not distributed evenly, but are grouped together in these so-called clusters. And so I'm painting these random leaf clusters in all sorts of sizes and shapes. Of course this shape should be still somewhat contained and shouldn't be like all crazy and wrinkly and whatnot and stringy. Like, this doesn't make sense. You also don't have to follow the guideline perfectly. You can paint outside or leave some gaps in between. It is completely up to you, and bring in some variety into your painting. You can see that I'm already using a very dark color, and so let me talk about that. It is highly recommended that you either start with the darkest or the brightest color at first and work yourself towards the other direction. It also depends on the tool you're using. If you're using watercolors, colored pencils, or pastel chalks, then normally the darkest colors are more dominant, and therefore it is better if you start with the brightest ones. But if you're using, for example, oil paints, you can do it the other way around, with the brighter color sticking to the darker one. And of course, if you're using digital media, then it is completely up to you. I personally like to start with the darkest color, because this way it is easier for me to get the shapes and the overall brightness right. And so let me show you what I already have prepared. There we go, it looks much better than what I was doing. And in general, this is how the tutorial will go. I will show you in between the steps what you need to do and all the techniques, and then when I'm done explaining, I show you the actual finished step. Not only is it more time efficient, but it also makes it easier for me to show you something that actually looks good. Also, let me say that I'm painting these leaves on one singular layer. I'm giving myself this limitation in order to get closer to traditional methods. In this way I'm making sure that not only those that are using digital media can benefit from my videos, but everybody. In this next step we want to put down some actual color. I have a brush here that is very rough, like dropping a bunch of little dots in that should imitate the leaves. And for the foliage of oak trees, the leaves are not really orientated in any sort of special way. They're not like pointing up or just hanging down like so, but it's more random, and therefore we will just do some circular movements or just simply tap in here in order to get the right texture. But before we start to paint, we want to think about where the light comes from. In our case, it will be coming from the top left and slightly from the front. Therefore, the bottom right and the back part of the tree will be the darkest. So we want to basically focus for the most part on these parts. Just drop in a bunch of dark color. The darkest spots should be quite dense, but as we get closer and closer to the brighter areas, we just decrease the density to the point where we just straight up leave out the brightest clusters over here on this edge. So we fill out these leaf cluster shapes that we've sketched out before, and you can see we have some gaps in between those shapes. We want to fill out these gaps in between here too, but not completely, just partially. We want to keep the shape of these leaf clusters at least somewhat. Also, there can be holes here and there in the foliage because, again, the tree is not a perfect solid shape, but there are some spots here and there where you can actually look through. One thing you also want to do at this stage is to plan out where you want to leave some holes in the front layer of the leaves. What do I mean with that? Well, you can imagine that the leaves are separated into two layers. The back part, that is the furthest away from the viewer, and the front part, which is, well, closer. In our case, our front layer will be brighter than the back part. Therefore, if we plan out some holes in the front layer, we will straight up see the dark leaves in the background. So let's say we take this general area around here, and we want to make sure that there is enough dark paint and enough dense paint around here, because we will barely or not at all go back around this area to put down more color in the later stages, because we want to avoid painting the brighter color into this area. And so we have plenty of dark color put down at the bottom right, and also the areas leave some holes in the front layer. Now it is time to pick out the next color in our palette. And let me talk about it in general. So we started with a very dark blue-green, and as we go to the left here, you can see that the hue shifts more to a yellow. Of course, you can just go ahead and only use green, a dark green to the bright green. But if you add more like a blue in the darker areas and a yellow to the bright ones, you bring in more color variation. These colors have some moods about them. The blue is more cooler, as are the shadows. And the yellow is warmer, and by using it, it makes the tree look like it's standing outside in the bright sunlight. So I highly recommend that you're using these colors. And what we do now is we fill out the rest of these leaf cluster shapes, and also put down some extra paint here in the darker areas and define where the light hits these clusters and where are the shadows going to end up. So this is basically what you want to do. You just fill out these upper left parts of the leaf clusters with the brighter color and leave out the bottom right for the shades. But of course you don't exactly perfectly follow it. You can just go ahead and drop in some extra little details into the darkest areas, and you don't have to exactly follow the leaf cluster shapes that we sketched out before. Just drop in here and there some little extra details. It is completely up to you. And in the end it will look something like this. Around here the density is not very high yet, but this will be changed by adding the brighter colors. And you can see that I left this spot here very dark. I barely put in the brighter color. And we pick the next brightest color. And as we get brighter and brighter, especially in the center part and here the bottom part, we just want to very lightly tap into the tree. Not only gives it a better leaf texture, but we don't want to put down too much paint, like too strong, otherwise it would look out of place. And we just straight up ignore this area here. And what you can do, which I already partially did over here, is to add little extra details to the border. Some little floating leaves that are not necessarily connected to anything. You really don't have to be a perfectionist about it. Just drop in some random floating leaves here and there, and it brings more variety and more shape to your overall tree. You basically can do that in the center part here too, like as I described before, just add in some random spots where there are some brighter areas, and it makes it much more interesting looking. And so you can see it is getting brighter and brighter, especially here at the top. And we're just gonna go ahead and tap in the next brightest colors. And when we have these little floating leaves, make sure that they also have the correct color according to the brightness they are facing. Especially here we have some darker color still. We don't want to go ahead with the brightest one, otherwise it would be out of place. But up here it is totally fine. And you can see that the top here is getting very dense, and is in general what you want to do. You keep the center and the top of the tree very dense and don't leave too many gaps in between. However, here on the sides you can go ahead and make it more scattered looking. And now we have the bright yellow color. Just very lightly tap in the details and they shimmer in the sunlight and makes the tree so much warmer looking. I really love it. And this is the final result for the foliage that I painted. Now we finally get to the wood part of the tree and put everything together. I have here a brush that is very solid. We're gonna straight up use this one. As for the color, we have some dark gray. It can have also some brown in it. So it's like a dark orange, not very saturated dark orange, but this is basically just very dark because the tree is very dense, casts a lot of drop shadows, and therefore the wood part would be complete in the shadows and therefore appear very dark. Now I need to be careful because I'm getting closer to the leaves, and I'm switching back to this brush here that I used for painting the leaves, and just very lightly tap in there. I'll also like partially tap right into the leaves, but very lightly. We just want to make sure that it's still dark enough overall, but we want to retain the shape of these leaves. We don't want to destroy it, and have a nice transition from the wood to the leaf parts. And here the hole that we left before is the perfect spot for our trunk to grow. We can make it very warped looking, it has curves around very widely, and I'm not worrying too much about these transitions now because it would take too much time, but we will see it in the end how it's gonna look. And so this is the main branch, the main trunk, and from there we will operate and let the other branches grow out. And what we want to do is generally to make sure that the leaves are all holed up. The branch will grow towards their direction, and there will be smaller branches that are growing out of it and hold all of these clusters up and make sure that they're not just floating around. For example, now I want to have this group here being held together by one branch, and so there will be one hiding behind the leaves and growing out, and have a bunch of smaller branches. And in general, you want to have the branches go thinner and thinner. You don't want to have any too sudden of a jumps, like there wouldn't be a small twig growing out of the trunk, for example. And also you won't see too many small branches or even twigs, because they will be hidden for the most part by the leaves after all. As for the direction in which they grow in general, you can remember the rule that they want to have their leaves reach up into the sunlight. Now if you have already a branch that is at the very top of the tree, it doesn't have to worry too much, and therefore it can just grow in any direction it wants to, as long as it's not like straight down, of course. However, if we're down here at the bottom, the big branch normally just grows to the side, and the smaller branches can reach up. They are not too heavily pulled down by the gravity. And so we have a bunch of smaller branches that grow up like this and help the leaves to tank as many sunlight as they need. It's very hard for me to paint decently live, so here is the prepared version. It looks much better now, and you can see everything is being held together. Now, if I would have wanted to keep the number of branches at least somewhat realistic, it would look much more chaotic like that. There are hundreds and hundreds of branches in reality that these oak trees have. However, in a painting or drawing, it can get overwhelming very quickly to the point where it just doesn't look good. So my advice is, if you get to a point where it looks like everything is held together, especially the front layer of the leaves, then that's about the time where you can just stop adding more branches. Not only do you save time like that, but you also make it so much less confusing for the viewer. There are of course other ways to add in the branches. For example, you could have started from the very beginning with drawing the branches, or you paint at first the back layer of the leaves, then the branches and the trunk, and then the front part of the leaves. For any method, there are some ups and downs. For example, here in this case, I was able to freely drop in the leaves and the leaf clusters however I wanted and be very liberal about it. And then at the end, I had to adjust the branches to the leaves. However, if you start with the branches at first, you have to adjust the leaves to the branches. So it comes down to personal preference, I would say. Now, one last thing we want to do is we want to drop in some brighter areas for the tree. Now, we just go barely one step brighter. We don't really want to make it too bright, but adding a lighter area, a lighter side where the sun at least a little bit shines on, can give the tree more three-dimensionality. What do I mean with that? We can decide in which way the branches are growing, more to the front or to the back. Let's take this branch for example. I have here the brighter areas on the trunk on the upper and lower side. And now what do we need to do? Well, if we decide that this branch grows to the back, and you simply connect that light area as if this branch just doesn't exist. You just cut it off. And then it can have its own lighter areas if it does have any. If you decide to let it grow to the front, then you connect the lighter area and you just slightly let it fade out underneath the branch. And you let the shadow of this branch cut into the trunk in a way. And add in some lighter areas over here. And this is how you decide in which direction the branch grows. Let's take this branch here for another example, growing to the other side. If you want to have it at the front, we have a light area that connects, that cuts into the trunk. If we want to have it grow to the back, we just leave it dark as it is, and maybe there is some slight color here, but not too much. Another advice that I can give you is avoid drawing branches that grow directly towards the viewer or away from the viewer, because it can get very confusing looking. If we just limit it to branches grow to the side, just lightly to the front or back, then it makes it so much like simpler looking, but also more pleasing to the eye, and it's much easier to illustrate. If you have a branch growing right in front of the trunk, for example, you have to put a lot of work into it in order to like distinguish it from the rest of the trunk. If you have like a lot of overlapping branches and whatnot, it can get confusing very quickly. So at least somewhat try to avoid doing that. But of course, you can still do it if you want to, and it still can look good if you put enough work into it. And so this is how my final version looks like. I have prepared the second version of an oak tree in autumn this time, in order to give you a little bit more to see. And while the time lapse runs, I will tell you some quick interesting facts about oak trees. Oak trees can live 200 years and longer, some of them even over 1,000 years, which is amazing. They reproduce by having male flowers in the form of catkins produce the pollen, which is then carried by the wind or insects to the female flowers, and when they are pollinated they grow their acorns. I often looked at these acorns and thought to myself, they kind of look tasty, like hazelnuts. However, you still have to be careful because they contain tannins, which is not life-threatening, but is still not good for you. And be careful that your dogs or horses or cows don't eat them. Fortunately, tannins can be removed easily by soaking the acorns in water. The oak tree is commonly used as a symbol of strength and endurance, and this is probably the reason why it is the most popular national tree among the countries around the world. And so this is the finished version of my oak tree in autumn. I made the front layer much spottier and also varied the shape even more, had some bigger gaps in between here. And you can go ahead and draw your oak tree in whatever way you want to. What I showed you in this video are more guidelines than actual rules. For example, you can go ahead and have your color palette very different and have way less colors, for example, or much crazier colors. You can make the trunk enormous and warpy looking. You can shape the foliage in much crazier ways than I've shown to you. Really, you have so much freedom with painting trees. It is a lot of fun, I can tell you. This cushion is made only for one cat, you sillies. Oh my. Oh my gosh. I hope this video will be helpful to you in order to draw your own amazing looking oak trees. And as always, if you have any questions or constructive feedback, then please leave a comment down below. And if you want to have more information and links, then please check out the description of this video. Alright then, have fun drawing!